Hey guys, how are you guys? I hope you're all doing well. This live is actually going to be in English, and we are pretty much talking about all things chiropractic related. We are talking about how chiropractic works and really kind of understanding the function of the human body is what I'm trying to aim for. So, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and turn off all the comments here and we'll get started. Okay, so talking about chiropractic, I don't really know exactly how I want to start this or where I want to go with it. I just kind of very sporadically decided to get this live going. Okay, so when I talk about chiropractic, I'll kind of explain to you what it means to me, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some background information as far as what I know throughout a few years of practice that I've been in, and hopefully that will answer some of your questions. Obviously, if you have further questions, you can ask me. You can put them in the comments below, and I'll try to answer them as much as I can, and go from there. Oof. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin with chiropractic and really the definition of what it means or what chiropractic means in my mind. When we talk about chiropractic, we're actually talking about a profession that views the human body as a whole, the mind, the body, and the soul. And when these three elements are sync and in harmony, that is when the body is in a state of health. So what plays an important role in our body and in our mind and in our soul, in which I'll actually go over what it's talking about when we're talking about the physique, what it's talking about when we're talking about the mind, and what we're talking about when we're talking about the soul. I'll start off with the body because I think that's probably a little bit more easier to understand, and kind of go from there and hopefully move on to the mind and the soul. Now, keep in mind that the mind and the body are kind of working together because we are going to talk about some behavioral stuff, which is correlated with your mind, and then we're going to talk about some changes of physiology that happens within the body that is also related with the mind. And having said that, let's go ahead and get started on the sympathetic response and the parasympathetic response. These are the two autonomous responses that the human body has. When we're talking about an autonomous response, means we don't really control it. It happens spontaneously due to whatever the surrounding stimulus is going to be. And when we're talking about the sympathetic response, we are actually talking about a phrase called fight or flight. And I'll give you an example so you're able to fully wrap your head around this matter. Fight or flight, imagine yourself at a situation where a deadly animal is right in front of you. Your body is going to have an immediate reaction, and that reaction is physiological, it's systemic. And what ends up happening is your heart rate is going to increase, your blood vessels are all going to dilate, your adrenal gland is going to produce cortisol to eventually produce adrenaline. And all the muscles in your body, especially around the chest area, so we're talking about the diaphragm, the intercostal muscles, the muscles of the neck and the shoulder, are all going to engage to lift up the rib cage and expand the rib cage as much as they can to bring in or inhale as much oxygen as possible in order to give you superhuman abilities, superhuman power to run the fastest or fight the hardest, to overcome the sympathetic situation that you're in. And once the whole situation is controlled and under proper circumstances, your body is going to go back to its homeostasis or to that equilibrium. And vice versa, we have the parasympathetic response, which the phrase rest and digest come into mind. And when we're resting, we are in a complete relaxed environment. And when we talk about digestion, we're not just talking about the digestive system, your stomach, the small intestines, the large intestines, but rather we're talking about the metabolic rate that changes in your body as well. And when we're talking about the parasympathetic response, we're talking about your body and the mind being in a very relaxed state, and the increased metabolic rate will also help with the properties that bring in healing. Now, when we're talking about in terms of chiropractic, here is what we need to understand. When we do a chiropractic evaluation, we try to evaluate the human body, the physique, as we see it, whether it's on x-ray or whether it's the patient that is in front of us. Also evaluating your behavioral patterns, how your mind is operating. And when we talk about the soul, we're actually talking about how much willpower do you actually have, which in most cases, I see a lot of people saying, though, I really want to do this, but when it comes down to all the hard work that they need to put into it, they back off. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about the soul. Now, as far as the physique, there's a lot of subcategories that incorporate with our health. And oxygen being the number one element for human survival is the first thing that I'd like to actually talk about. When we breathe in and out and the process of respiration is happening, there are actually a sequence of firing mechanism with our musculature that needs to happen within the body in order to have a properly functioning system. Now, at the bottom of our respiratory system, we have our diaphragm muscle, which is the biggest muscle as far as this group of muscles that we're talking about. And it is sitting at the bottom of the lungs, and the purpose of this muscle is to contract, and when it contracts, it pushes down all the organs in the abdomen. It pushes it down, so creates more room for your lungs to expand within your chest cavity. And after our diaphragm, we have our intercostal muscles, which are the muscles in between our ribs, which start from rib number 12 and moves up to all the way to rib number 1. So after our diaphragm is fully contracted, we expect the bottom ribs to the muscles of the bottom rib to contract and essentially go up like an elevator. So we have the lowest part of the rib muscles that are contracting, and then the mid part, and then the upper part, and essentially we're going to get to the muscles of the shoulder and the neck. And this sequence, when it happens appropriately, then we have full inhalation and a very deep inhalation, so we get as much oxygen as possible into our body. Keep in mind that oxygen is the first element for human survival. So if there is lack of oxygen in our system, that itself could be damaging in a sense where your body can go into survival mode, that is fight or flight. Now, when we're talking about the sequence of this contractions, we expect the diaphragm to contract first and fully, and then go into the intercostal muscles for them to contract fully, and then same goes with the muscles of the shoulder blades and the shoulder area and the neck area, in order to fully expand the chest cavity and in order to bring in as much oxygen as possible. Now, when we intake this oxygen, this doesn't necessarily mean that every single cell has been oxygenated. The way we can actually make sure that each individual cell is oxygenated as much as it can be, what we need to pay attention to is, as we exhale, how long can we hold our breath without oxygen? That gives us the cue that our cell, each individual cells has been fully oxygenated. So it's not necessarily how long you can withhold your breath when you have oxygen into your chest cavity, but rather when you exhale all the oxygen, how long can you withhold yourself from taking the next inhalation. The second important factor when it comes to the physique is drinking adequate water. Now, keep in mind that water is our second element when it comes down to human survival. The human body is made up of 60%, about 60% of water. If I have a plant, and if I don't water this plant based on what it actually requires. So we have some plants that require water daily, some plants that require water weekly, some even monthly. If I don't water it enough, it's going to dry out and it's not going to be living anymore. And if I water it too much, it's also not going to be living the way it should be. You're going to have too much water. So with the human body, the same thing applies. Considering that 60% of our body is made up of water, we generally don't drink enough water and we don't keep enough hydration in our body. And again, when we don't do that on a regular basis, automatically your body goes into a survival mode and it's going to want to fight or flight the situation. Now, this doesn't obviously happen in a very dramatic way because you don't have a deadly animal in front of you. However, it is happening just enough for your body to feel that stress level, and you're going to start the process or start the brain waves in going into a survival mode, and that can be damaging to the body itself. So we want to basically make sure that each individual is getting enough water daily, and most of the time we're talking about a gallon of water for most people is a good enough amount of water to drink daily. The third element of survival, of human survival, is actually nutrition. When we talk about nutrition, we're talking about macronutrition, which consists of carbohydrates, protein, and lipids. And we're also talking about micronutrients, which is all your vitamins and your minerals. Now, when we talk about the health of a human body, the healthiest possible way to eat is any produce or any produce that you can take from a tree or a plant. So we're talking about all different types of fruits, different types of vegetables, legumes, and also, what am I missing here? So we got the veggies, we got the legumes, we got, and your nuts, right? So we're talking about your fruits, veggies, legumes, and nuts. So these would be a good source of nutrients for the human body. Now, keep in mind, I did leave out animal product, although I do believe that we should consume animal product. However, I don't really believe that we should be consuming the amount of animal product throughout the day. I believe that maybe we should limit the consumption to one meal a day, meaning you can either have, for example, eggs for your breakfast, and then for your lunch and dinner, you're going to have, a veggie or a vegetarian, not vegetarian, but a vegan diet. Or if you decide to have meat for your lunch or chicken for your lunch, you can keep your breakfast and your dinner a vegan diet. And same goes for your dinner. So it's the rule of thumb, I guess, for the nutrition part would be 10% to 15% of your daily caloric intake to come from animal products. Now, keep in mind that when we consume too much animal products, this causes our stomach to work in overdrive, And as our stomach is working in overdrive, that's going to cause our body to go into a stress form, because your digestive system is not used to having this much animal product or this much processed food or this much non-organic food in the body. So it's having to work twice as hard to be able to digest all this stuff. And that itself is going to cause very minor but still enough stress for your body to feel. And when this happens on a regular basis over time, that itself can cause wear and tear and damage to the body. The time that we eat is also critical. Keep in mind that part of rest and digest, or parasympathetic, is sleeping. And we tend to eat very, very late at night. If we do eat late at night, what ends up happening is when we are ready to go to sleep, our stomach is actually working in order to digest the food that we just ate. So our stomach is not resting, so that therefore our brain cannot be resting, and that itself can impair our sleep, and it could actually decrease the quality of sleep that we get. So make sure to not eat almost about 4 hours prior sleeping, and that would be a nice hygiene for our nutrition. And since we started talking about sleep, let's go ahead and move on to our next element for survival, and that is sleeping. Resting and sleeping, this happens on a daily basis. There are some people that don't get enough rest, and that could potentially cause wear and tear and unwanted stress for the body. And that goes same with sleeping over time. Sleeping too much is also not necessarily good for the human body. I would probably say the recommended sleep time, 6 to 8 hours, is a decent amount of sleep. For some people, 6 hours is enough. For some people, it's not enough. 8 hours is enough. But for the most part, anything more than 8 hours, generally speaking, it can cause some disturbance into the health. Now, when we talk about sleep hygiene, we are talking about how do we fall asleep? In what position are we comfortable to fall asleep? I do get this with a lot of my patients saying that I'm not comfortable sleeping on my back. I'm generally more comfortable sleeping on my side or sleeping on the stomach. Now keep in mind, if you are comfortable in a certain sleep posture, this could potentially mean that your body has some limitations in some areas. Maybe some people have difficulty laying facing up, that causes them low back pain or neck pain or shoulder pain or wherever pain they might feel. Those are limitations that you have within your joints that if it's addressed properly and those limitations are gone away, then you can actually place your body in any position that you want and be able to fall asleep. We're also talking about the hours that you sleep. So it does matter if you fall asleep at 3 in the morning, waking up at 12, or if you're falling asleep at 9 in the evening, waking up at 4 in the morning. All that kind of plays a key role. I generally say it's probably best to look at animals and see how they operate, and we should probably do the same. That goes the same with eating habits. We generally if you pay attention to animals, we normally see they eat right before sunrise and right before sunset, and that's probably the best way we can also approach our eating habits. And when it comes down to sleeping, it's probably best to wake up roughly about 4 or 5 in the morning and sleeping about 8 or 9 p.m. or 8 or 9 at nighttime. That's probably the best time to sleep. I know I don't really necessarily follow that rule, even though I try, but it doesn't happen as often as I would like it to happen. But when I don't follow these rules, I cannot expect my body to function the way it should. And if I can't function the way my body is designed to function, then I can expect some illness and some dysfunction within the system. So when we talk about sleep hygiene, we are talking about the position that you fall asleep, the hours that you fall asleep, and also the quality of your sleep. The quality of your sleep actually has a direct link with the way you breathe. Keep in mind that When we breathe, we want to bring our body into a parasympathetic response, meaning rest and digest, right? So when our mind goes into the rest mode, then we can actually expect our body to have that the full night's sleep that has good quality, and we wake up feeling empowered rather than restless. So breathing has a lot to do with the quality of our sleep and our digestive system. What we put into our body has a direct effect into our sleep. And this whole purpose of having this live is to teach you, and really to teach myself, to do the things that are required for my body to easily go into a parasympathetic response, so I can actually allow my body to heal. And lastly, the fifth element that I wanted to talk to you guys about is movement. Obviously, this is not essential for living. However, if we don't move, and this is, I believe, Einstein said, a body that is in motion will stay in motion. So if this body is not in motion, right, it's very sedentary, what's going to end up happening is I'm going to use this phrase, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. We have our motor cortex, and the motor cortex actually controls each part of our body, our face, the movements of the face, the shoulder, the biceps, the thighs, the legs, the foot. It controls all that. So when we go into a sedentary lifestyle, we're not going to use our muscles. And when we don't use our muscles, it's almost like you're blocking the highway and no cars can ever travel on that road. What's going to end up happening, we're going to have a lot of debris that are going to fall in. Just like if you don't clean a certain surface at your home, that surface is going to collect dust. So what this means as far as health related or chiropractic related, when your body does not move, we're not going to have those ascending and descending information that's supposed to go from our brain to the tissue and from the tissue to the brain. And when we have decreased amount of neurotransmitters that are actually traveling in this path, we're going to have atrophy in the muscles and also atrophy in the cortex of our brain. So it's super critical that we actually bring in movements into our lives. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about movement, it is important for a physician to do a functional assessment. When we talk about a functional assessment, we want to basically evaluate how functional a part of your body is. And I'm just going to kind of use my head and neck as an example because you guys can see it. Now, in the orthopedic world, we actually have this expectation from the movement of your head and neck. So we'll have, let's say, 60 degrees forward bending is required, roughly about 30 to 40 degrees of extending the neck, roughly about 45 degrees of lateral bend, 45 degrees of lateral bend to the opposite side, and about 80 degrees of rotation and 80 degrees of rotation to the other side. This is what we have, what our expectation is as far as the motion or range of motion that we'd like to see in the cervical spine and in the head. And a lot of people have limitation within these movements. So when they're looking down, they don't get the full 60. When they're looking up, they don't get the full 30. Or even if they do it, there is some pain that is associated with it. So when we're talking about these movements, we want to really have an assessment and figure out where are your limitations. For some people, you could have short anterior muscles, or you could have weak anterior muscles. Or this could be vice versa. You could have, weak muscles, the weak posterior muscles, or short posterior muscles. And the contraction can also be impaired in isometric contractions or isotonic contractions, which include concentric and eccentric loading of those tissues. And also we could talk about the ligamentous tissue that is attached to your vertebrae, And this whole thing can actually be evaluated. And that this is so important because a lot of people will go into, let's say, different types of exercises: lifting, CrossFit, football, basketball, martial arts, or it could be boxing, it could be any type of activities, and they are not aware that they have some sort of limitation in their range of motion. So they start doing shoulder presses, they're starting to do face pulls, they start to do all these types of exercises within this limitation that they already had. And when you start to strengthen the muscles with a limitation that you have, you're only going to make yourself more limited. So it's super important for you to be assessed by a physician to make sure that you actually have proper range of motion, proper biomechanic, and once your body is ready, then you can actually go play basketball and play all these other sports. And you can actually do both of them together, where you're working on your limitations and also you're playing the sport that you like, but now you have enough body awareness to understand where you're limited and incorporate what you practice into the sport that you're playing. So these are the 5 elements that are critical as far as the physique goes. Now, when we talk about the mind, we want to talk about behavior, we want to talk about emotion, and we want to talk about, again, the sympathetic and parasympathetic response. So as far as emotion goes, there's a lot of different things that can happen throughout the day. Some people can make you angry, some people can make you happy, some people can make you sad, some people can make you, you know the drill. These emotions are completely normal and they are supposed to be there. However, how you react based on the stimulus that you get is the type of control we are expecting from you. And obviously, there are many different techniques that you can use in order to bring yourself back into equilibrium when you have that stimulus that could potentially harm your body. Now, remember, too much happiness or too much sadness, too much, anger or too much joy. We want to actually be able to bring ourselves back into equilibrium, and we need to understand how we can actually do that, how we can approach that. For some people, for example, if you get angry, some people will yell, some people will throw things, some people will fight. If you get sad, you end up crying, or you end up, going in a corner into a wall and just sit there quietly. Some people just kind of watch a movie or whatever the case may be. But what we need to do is we need to understand when you're emotionally triggered, what is the most immediate thing that you can do in order to bring yourself back into equilibrium. And that actually will help you as far as your autonomous response to whether you're going to be into a sympathetic response or you're going to be in a parasympathetic response. Now, when we talk about your physique, keep in mind that the amount of oxygen, the amount of water, the amount of nutrition, or the quality of nutrition, and also the amount of sleep and quality of sleep can cause your body to go into sympathetic or parasympathetic. Now, we want to do things that will take our body from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Now, I'm not saying that having sympathetic is a bad thing, because it's absolutely not. It's quite actually necessary. However, we don't have to be in a sympathetic response all the time. This is where majority of people are living nowadays. Nowadays, we're mostly living in a sympathetic response. However, this sympathetic response has intensity. Most of us are probably in 10% or 20% intensity. Some of us are maybe in 80-90% intensity. We're trying to actually control the intensity and be able to bring the intensity down in order to bring our body back into equilibrium, whether it's physical or emotional. Now, when we're talking about the spiritual aspect of the human body, we're actually talking about your willpower. So everything that I had mentioned today, you might say, oh my God, yeah, I don't drink enough water. Yeah, I don't really have control over my emotions. I don't really have control over my movements, and so on and so forth. So now the question is, how strong is your willpower? How much are you willing to put effort in fixing these things? If I'm not mistaken, either Hippocrates or I don't really remember, to be honest with you, but somebody said, how much are you willing to put aside the things that have made you sick before I can actually heal you? So yes, chiropractic can actually be very, very beneficial to the human body. But the question is, once you come and get visited, and once you come and get adjusted, how much are you actually willing to change your habits, your bad habits, your good habits even? Because there are those things that have made you sick over time, and if you don't ever remove those things or replace those things with positive things and positive habits, how can you expect your doctor, your physician, to be able to cure you? And it's just like saying, listen, I went to my general practitioner, I have high blood pressure, I have diabetes, and it's caused because of my poor daily habits, because I don't drink enough water, because I don't eat healthy foods, because I don't exercise. And yes, your doctor is going to prescribe you some, hypertension medication, and he's going to give you that prescription. You're going to take those medication, but that is literally putting a band-aid over the problem. The chiropractor is generally trying to figure out the root cause of your issue and try to pull that root out, right? So if your hypertension is being caused by being overly stressed and have no way of dealing with that stress, you're not drinking enough water, so your heart is always begging for that water. You're not having enough, I don't want to say enough, but you're not having quality nutrition, or you have vitamin D deficiency, magnesium deficiency. Oh, and let me kind of remind you with this. A study, if I'm not mistaken, this was done a while ago. A study showed that a lot of people, or about 50% of the people with migraine, studies showed that they had the magnesium deficiency. So, and I've actually had a few patients who had migraine issues, and when I suggested that they would take magnesium supplement, the frequency of their migraines actually decreased. So it's super important to understand having improper nutrition can cause a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, and a lot of dysfunction. Not having enough water can also do that. Not having enough oxygen, not having enough sleep, not having the correct type of movement can cause pain, and so on and so forth. So having said all that, my purpose of recording this live or bringing this video is hopefully to not only bring my own awareness, but also kind of give you a few hints of where you might be needing to improve in your lifestyle habits in order to be pain-free. Now, a lot of these things you can actually do yourself at home. There are plenty of videos out on YouTube, out on Instagram, that you can practice on your breathing. You can research on how much water you should be consuming. Same thing with your nutrition, same thing with sleep, and same thing with movement. Now, with the movement, what I recommend is genuinely being assessed by a professional, because they are able to tell you where you are limited and what kind of limitations you have, because you may not understand proper joint mechanic. You might not understand, let's say a muscle spasm happens and you might be afraid of it, but that might be exactly what you need in order to overcome that pain. I had a good friend of mine who I asked him to curl his toes forward, and the back of his feet, or the bottom of his foot, went into spasm, and immediately he wanted to get out of that position. And I told him, no, this is actually getting your motor cortex to fire up, and that spasm is exactly that feeling that you're supposed to feel. Don't be afraid of it. Go into it. After a little while, you're no longer going to feel that spasm. And he did that, and that's exactly what happened. So being able to understand your pain is super important, and sometimes you may not understand it. That's why it's important for you to be assessed by a professional, and they can help you, tell you what kind of limitations you have, what improper biomechanics you have, and hopefully be able to direct you into the proper direction as far as your uh, healthy habits goes and as far as your improvement goes. Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. This video is going to get posted on YouTube, hopefully. If you guys want to check this out, I'm actually going to kind of post it on my stories as well, so you have a link to go back to YouTube. But I hope this information was useful for you. I would really appreciate if you share this information with your friends, with your family. And if you have any questions, please leave me a comment, and hopefully I will be able to get to it and answer some of your questions. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope you have a nice day. I have no idea how to get this. All right.